Well, hello everybody. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here sharing this amazing event with all of you. My name is Marcela Danowski. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And today we are going to be talking about slow looking. This presentation is entitled Mastering Lessons Through the Art of Slow Looking. And you might be wondering why slow looking. What it is all about? Well, I came across with this idea because I feel that in today's world, we are constantly rushing, right? And we need to cover as much content as possible in our lessons. And I feel that sometimes we just simply need to slow down a little bit, right? And actually, that can help our students to learn more deeply and to engage with our lessons, right? So that's why, hopefully, throughout this presentation today, we are going to explore this concept of slow looking and how it can transform the way we teach our students and how they can be totally motivated, engaged with learning, and most importantly, foster 21st century skills. So, are you ready? And to begin with, let's start with this concept of slow looking. What is it? No, and I'm going to show you now 3 different statements. And I would like you to take a minute, go through these concepts. Let's see if you can identify it. Which is the one that clearly refers to slow looking? Okay, so consider the 3 of them. The very first one says that slow looking enhances learning by promoting patience, empathy. The second one, that slow looking deepens understanding by encouraging careful observation. And the third one, that slow looking fosters mindfulness and critical thinking in students. So, are you ready? Do you already know which of these 3 statements best describe slow looking? Let me tell you that all of this, right? This is an approach that it's not just simply about seeing, observing, obviously carefully in detail, but it's all about thinking deeply. It's about analyzing, reflecting on an object, an image, even a piece of information. And obviously, this is a method that encourages to foster curiosity, critical thinking, and it helps our students to make deeper connections with the material, with their environment, with their learning process. And aren't we just simply looking for that? So everything just simply started with Project Zero. And I'm pretty sure that you have heard of it, right? This is an approach that was developed by Harvard Graduate School of Education, Project Zero, and this is Project Zero 1, actually. And thanks to the help of classroom teachers, they came up with this amazing project. And it's an approach that, as I said before, it does not just simply help us like teachers, but it helps students to develop critical thinking skills. 21st century skills, actually, I would say, no? And it's all about observing and engaging with art mainly, but as I mentioned before, not only with art, you can just simply use any picture, any image, even a piece of text, a piece of information. And you know that while they were carrying out research, while developing this approach, they found out that while people are engaged with art, with images, naturally there are 6 key types of thinking skills that just simply naturally come up. And the very first one has to do with observing and describing. Obviously, when we are involved with this idea of closely looking at an object, an image, at a scene, well, we are describing what we can notice. We're paying attention to the details. And in order to do that, we need to slow down. We need to ask our students, we need to encourage them to slow down, to observe carefully, to pay attention to those details that if they don't do this carefully, they would just simply ignore. They would just simply miss. So it also strengthens that ability to articulate their observations clearly. The second thinking ability that is developed has to do with reasoning, but with evidence. So students are encouraged to support their observations with evidence. They always need to be ready to account for their choices. And this skill offers analytical thinking. As they are learning, because probably they don't know how to do this yet. So we are paving the way. We are helping them to be able to justify their interpretations. And based on, obviously, what they see at first, rather than just simply assumptions. Okay, and they also start making connections to prior knowledge. The third thinking type that occurs while applying slow looking has to do with questioning and even investigating. Because the slow looking invites and let's say sparkles curiosity, because students feel encouraged to ask questions. They start wondering, what if, and what would happen? And they want to keep on exploring even more. So this type of thinking somehow promotes inquiry, promotes deeper investigation into the subject that they are exploring. Fourthly, comparing and connecting. Students are engaged with different objects, with different images, and they start to observe that there's certain patterns, that they can start making connection between ideas. And this kind of thinking somehow supports interdisciplinary learning. And they start relating concepts, knowledge that they have learned into different subjects. Then, exploring viewpoints, because this type of approach encourages students to consider multiple perspectives. How is it that my friend understands something differently? How is it that he sees something that I cannot see? No, and we're dealing with different interpretations from the same object. How is that possible? Well, that can happen, and that fosters empathy, reflection. Students need to be open-minded, flexible. They got to understand that, well, there are different viewpoints, and that gets them into interpreting and reflecting upon the same thing, right? And therefore, and we get to the very last thinking skill, has to do with complexity, with understanding complexity of this thinking process, right? Recognizing that thinking is not that easy. It's not that obvious, no? And there are different layers. And that, well, because of dealing with one object, one image, does not necessarily mean that we are all thinking on the same thing, right? And this somehow supports this idea of open-ended exploration. There's no one right answer. And that flexibility, right, that, well, it's part of being and living in a community. So, before we plunge into, I would say, the most interesting part, the practical one, I want to make this clear, because there are certain, I would say, that misconceptions on what slow looking is, right? And it's important for us to distinguish that slow looking has nothing to do with yoga, with meditation, no, because We constantly mention, well, we need to slow down, we need to pay attention to detail, but it has to do with fostering, encouraging focus, patience, right? With observing, with thinking critically, but it's not mindfulness, okay? Then the second misconception has to do that slow looking takes place in art galleries, in museums. Not necessarily. We can just carry out a slow looking activity inside our classrooms, obviously in an art gallery, museum, in the playground, with nature, anywhere. And even deal with daily day objects, right? And lastly, slow looking doesn't mean that we need to all be quiet, in silence, super focused, concentrated, obviously. Those types of moments are super important and we value quiet reflection. But we also need conversation, collaboration. We need our students to be fully engaged into the lesson, into the activity, into discussions, and that is part of the process. So we need them to talk, to interact, and even to move around. Why not? So here we go. How are we going to apply slow looking in our classes? And mind you, I'm going to give you just some ideas. The objective of this presentation is to sparkle your creativity, and from here you will adapt and even create your own activities, okay? So let's start with, I would say, the simplest activity of all, which is just working with an image, working with a piece of art, and asking our students, well, what can you see? What is happening in here? And you can start from something as simple as asking them, well, in silence, observe, take down notes, or you can ask them to work in pairs. And while working with pairs, they're chatting with one another, using communicative skills, they're taking down notes. Or you can ask them to work collaboratively with the activity that it's called yes and. How does it work? Well, every single student will have to describe one particular aspect of this image. One person starts, well, I can see a girl who is sitting on the right. Then the fellow student continues, yes, and she's wearing an orange scarf. Then the following student goes on, yes, and she's wearing black shoes. And every single student will keep on adding more details. So first of all, they need to listen to one another. That is key, essential, so as not to repeat the same ingredients, elements that they've been mentioning or pointing out. And they're communicating, we are all participating in the same activity and building this whole image together, right? We're just simply paying attention to details. And please do not hesitate to ask, what makes you think that? How can you tell? How do you know? Because in that way, you're inviting your students to expand their interpretations, their thinking. So at the same time, some students need some prompting, some students need to have a different starting point, especially when you're just beginning, right, to explore slow looking in your classes. So guide them, provide them with some basic questions, okay? It's not that you're doing the whole activity for them. On the contrary, you're providing them with those first resources that they need, okay? Then another activity that you can do, just simply again, with a piece of art, with an image, you divide the class into 4 groups in the same way that you divide that image into 4 quadrants. All right? And you provide 1 quadrant to each group without letting the others see. And in groups, they will be describing in full detail what they can observe. If you're a language teacher and you want to focus on parts of speech, you can do so. You can just simply tell them, okay, well, just point out actions, objects, feelings, emotions. You can narrow it a little bit, yeah? And then, of course, we'd all share until we put all of the quadrants together and we see the whole picture and we compare and we see if we truly pay attention to details or not, yeah? And what it's more is that you can also turn this into a written activity. There's always that possibility of turning these activities into something written. And this is called word pile poems. So you can ask them in groups, in pairs, write down 5 nouns, 5 adjectives, 5 verbs. Well, now compare with one another. Now, well, let's try to put them together and let's create a poem. All right? And let's see what we can create. And we all share. So if you are a fan of literature, well, this is a fabulous opportunity to practice writing. And as we mentioned before, we can interact with lots of subjects. And this is one of my favorite activities. I applied this in literature. And before brainstorming, well, what this book is going to be about, let's have a look at the front cover, the back cover, well, you know, those typical activities, no? Well, in here, I started from a piece of art. I gave them this art, this piece of art, that's taken from the Second World War. It's a real one, and it helped me to pave the way into the setting in time and place of my story. It has to do with the Second World War. So, well, what can you see? And then, how can you connect this with the cover of the book? This is fabulous. I did it with my year 6 students at elementary level, and it worked. And once that you start looking for more pieces of art, you can even create a sort of gallery. And there are many applications where you can save them and create a sort of interactive art gallery. Well, nowadays, the sky is the limit, with technology. And you don't need to necessarily be an expert on art. That's the truth. You just simply Google, and that's actually what I did. I need a painting from the Second World War, and I came up with lots of different possibilities, and I selected this one because it worked with the purpose, the main idea of this book. Okay? Then, as we are dealing with Project 01, slow looking, we can also integrate Project 0 thinking routines. And this is one of my favorites, see, think, and wonder. And don't take it for granted, that your students know how to see, observe, think, and wonder. I know that probably we know or we believe that they already know how to, but these are so important. These are skills that are essential, and not just simply for observing art, for life, for any sort of discipline. So we just ask them first to see, observe. We give them time. We give them space to observe, to notice, to pay attention to details. Then they got to think. They got to build on their observations. And they start even asking, right? And reasoning, finding meaning, in the work of art until they finally get to the wonder, in which they are going to be fully engaged into that process of ongoing learning, of investigating, of inquiring themselves. And we need to emphasize that we don't need to get to an end. It's just simply the path to even inquiring, questioning ourselves even more, okay? And I always say that the more intriguing the pictures, the images that you use, the better, right? The more intriguing they are, the better. And that's why if you Google like 40 puzzling images from the New York Times, well, you will find images like this one, like the one I'm projected, no? And you start wondering, how is it that this man, no, ended up this way? And this is what we want. We want to foster that, no, critical thinking, that curiosity. And obviously, you're practicing specific vocabulary structures that use in English to communicate. And you can later on turn this into a written activity. And what's more, if you're interested in fostering different perspectives, well, you can ask them to work with another thinking routine, which is the circle of viewpoints. Okay, so in that case, you can allow them to all interact and start listening to their ways of thinking on what is going on in this picture. It's super interesting. And in the same way that we want to help them observe, right, and to think and to wonder, well, we cannot assume that our students know how to go about their thinking process. Another thing that we cannot take it for granted. So we need to check and see if they really know what they are challenged to think. No? And in that case, I invite you to use and to explore this technique that's called looking 10 times 2. It's a super powerful observation activity. And it's another thinking routine connected with images with art. That's why it's part as well of slow looking. And it helps students to go beyond what it's obvious, right? And we are pushing them into going into a further thinking, right? So they go to observe an image for 30 seconds, and then they will write down 10 words, phrases that they can connect, that they can relate to what the image is projecting. And then they repeat the process all over again, right? And mind you, the numbers can be easily changed because it depends on the rhythm, it depends on your students' interests, the type of visual stimulus that you're using. So feel free to change, adapt it. Instead of looking 10 times 2, you can do it 2 times 5 as well, and it will work. It's up to you. You decide, and you got to be flexible as well. And we can also use our body, and we can start drawing, right? While we are using an image, a picture, an object, and obviously the observation skills. So the idea of this activity called look, reproduce, compare, reflect, my goodness, so long, but it has to do with this, no, with being provided with an image, observing, looking at it carefully, and then from memory, you've got to try to reproduce it. You've got to draw with it with as many details as possible, as accurate as possible. It's really difficult because you've got to work as if you were a photocopier. And then once that your version is over, we compare with the original version. We try to find the similarities, the differences, and what type of details are not included in your version. And why is that so? Why is it that you didn't pay attention to that? Is that really relevant or not? Does it make a difference or not? And as we are talking about being engaged into drawing, you might have heard of it, you might have even experienced this activity. Sometimes it's going back to the simplest type of activities, no? Like back-to-back drawing. Your student is going to be provided with, again, an image, a visual aid, no, that the other student cannot see. And they got to provide the second student with as many details as possible, instructions. So obviously, communication takes an essential part of this activity. It's really important that that student communicates accurately, sharing details so that the other person follows all of those instructions and can reproduce the original image as clearly as possible. And therefore, the second student needs to listen carefully. and pay attention to detail. And in here, it's fabulous because without realizing, they are working collaboratively, they're fully engaged. The body as well takes an important role in here because they don't do it just simply on their desks, but just walking around the classroom. You can ask them to find a sport wherever they want. They're having fun, they're enjoying, right? While they're practicing English. And again, that's what we want them to do. And they are paying attention, observing. They're having a keen eye for detail, I would say. And well, I'm going back to the basic. If our students do not feel safe, if they don't feel that they are heard, that we care for them, well, learning is not going to take place. So, what if we work with emotions, with feelings, while working on observation, while working with art, with images? So, you can carefully select images that are related somehow with an emotion, a feeling, like this one's, for instance. And from there, you start asking them to connect as well with that image, to first of all detect, well, what emotion do you see here? How do you know? Well, because of the gestures, because of the face, because of the arms. Well, have you experienced that emotion? Because we want to listen to them as well, no? And how do you know when you feel that way? No, how is it that that emotion is somehow expressed physically, mentally? How can you tell? And what if we can also allow them to connect with their environment? Ask them to go outside and just simply close their eyes and listen and hear everything that is going around them. And later on, they can take down notes in their journals. I always ask my students to have a writing journal, okay? And sometimes we do creative writing, and sometimes we just simply do these sort of observations, okay? And again, they are using the language. So, the very last tip that I will give you is something as simple as dealing with objects. So if you're not interested in working with art, you don't know how to get started, just simply start with an object, with an everyday object. Like, I don't know, a bottle, a pencil, a copybook. And you start asking them, hey, what do we use it for? Do you think that in the past they used to use it in the same way that we do now? Who might have invented it and what for? How is it that this person came across with this idea? And I even invite you to ask them, can we improve this object? How can we do it way much better? And in that way, this slow looking activity turns out to be a design thinking activity. They can even turn this into a new object. Out of the blue, they came up with a new object, following obviously all the design thinking process and stages, let's say. So it's fabulous because we are allowing them to be creative. Yeah. So I think that, so as to summarize, if we integrate slow looking in our classes, we are unlocking a variety of benefits that go just simply beyond language acquisition. I would say that, first of all, the benefit number one has to do with language comprehension. They are obviously encouraged, engaged into conversations through that visual stimuli, which again, it could be an object, a piece of art, an image, even a text. And they got to take the time to carefully observe that, to analyze it. And therefore, they are going to be enhancing comprehension skills. And that can lead to understanding to a better, I would say, a better understanding of vocabulary or grammar structures, and even making good use of that contextual meaning within the English language. At the same time, our students are going to be applying critical thinking, which is one of the most important 21st century skills. So they are asked to think critically, to start making connections between that visual image, aid, and language. And by asking questions, by making observations, by drawing, by different interpretations, students develop high order thinking skills. And obviously, those skills are essential for effective language learning, but for life, I would say. Then we could also say that it fosters creativity and expression. Well, we've seen this is an amazing opportunity for students to be able to be heard, to be able to express their thoughts, even their feelings, their ideas, while communicating in English. So again, whether it's that we're discussing an artwork, interpreting a visual text, by making any sort of observation, students are truly encouraged to communicate, but to do it creatively and using their imagination. So that later on fosters language fluency and confidence. Confidence so as to start allowing themselves to express in English. It also fosters cultural awareness. Remember that whenever we are dealing with a piece of art, whenever we are dealing with an image, there's culture beneath, right? Traditions, different perspectives, different cultures are being portrayed there. So again, slow looking does not only improve their language skills, but they also gain another sort of insight when it comes to the cultural context in which English obviously is being used. So it truly fosters cultural awareness, empathy. They got to be flexible, open-minded, and they start somehow appreciating that diversity and that world that they are living in and sharing. And finally, there is a sort of promotion of mindfulness and well-being. Even though we said from the very beginning this has nothing to do with yoga, somehow it does have to be with well-being, with reducing stress, anxiety inside the class. No, it has to do with being more present, but present here in the classroom, in the learning process. So it promotes that. It encourages students to slow down, focus. Focus your attention into this image. Immerse yourselves into the present moment, no? And somehow create a learning environment, a positive learning environment in which we support one another, in which well-being is present. And in that way, you will reduce stress, anxiety, no fear. Some students don't want to participate. They don't want to speak. So little by little, if we introduce any of these activities, you will see that they will relax. They will start opening up, right? So that's why I selected this image of slow looking. Well, how can we define slow looking? Well, with look, obviously, because you look, you observe your world, but you need that to do what? You look so that you can see. And you see so that you can describe. And then you can analyze. And only if you analyze things, you can interpret them. And that is again, not just simply in class. This is what we need to develop in our students on a daily basis, because we need to get them ready for everything, for the real world, not just simply for an exam, okay? So that's why, hopefully, if you start incorporating slow looking in your classes, I think that you're offering them a variety of tools, of strategies that they can start applying on anything, no matter the subject. You improve their language comprehension, you improve their critical thinking, while at the same time you are developing creativity, cultural awareness. So clearly this is an approach that enriches us like a community, like a team, teacher, student. It's a learning experience. And most importantly, it empowers them. No, so they become proficient, confident while using the English language. So I invite you to embrace slow looking as a valuable tool in your teaching practices. No? And start inspiring your students to explore the real world while using English, right? And in that way, curiosity, mindfulness, imagination, creativity, and joy will appear in your lessons. So once again, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this amazing event. And I invite you to follow me if you want to get even more and more ideas. But remember, this is just a beginning. The sky is the limit. You can just modify it and be flexible with any of the activities that I have shared with you today, because you know your students, you know your students' needs and interests. So feel free to create even your own activities. So once again, thank you so much. It has been an honor. Thank you.